My name is Jesus Trevino. I'm on the chopping block at visceralchange.org.
Jesus, welcome to the chopping block.
Thank you.
Happy to have you with us, and happy
to be here.
Thank you for bringing me to your humble abode. The chopping block on the road, I guess, is what we kind of call it. Visceral change. And so, as you know, what we do is we try to interview folks who are doing diversity and inclusion work nationally, regionally, locally, anyone who's making an impact on people's lives in some way, shape, or form as a change agent. And you, far and away, are at the top of that list. So I thank you for the opportunity to really just get in front of you and talk a little bit about your story and share that with the rest of the world. So, Jesus, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay, well, let me first begin by telling you my story. And I'll begin my story by talking about the day that actually Dr. Martin Luther King actually was assassinated. And I remember that day simply because the next door neighbor saw me walking down the street, and he came up to me and he said, "Go and tell your brother Richard that they assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King." And for me, I had no idea who Dr. Martin Luther King was. The name sounded so odd. Martin Luther King, in a world where there are Joses and Marias, you know, and Arturos, Martin Luther King sounded so strange, right? So he made me repeat it, Martin Luther King, right? So now go tell your brother. So I went and I told my brother that they had assassinated somebody named Martin Luther King, and then my brother ran to the TV to turn the TV on to see what was going on. Later on, I was to find out what kind of an impact that individual actually had on my life, as well as the work that I do in diversity. Because after that, I got a scholarship to actually go to Eastern Michigan University as a farm worker. We used to be farm workers, my family and I, up in Michigan, but I got a scholarship to go to Eastern Michigan University. And all of that actually came as a result of all the work that Dr. King and subsequent leaders, Chavez and other folks actually did in order for those of us to have those opportunities to go to college. So that's where my journey actually starts. It's at Dr. King and at Eastern Michigan University. And then I've been at 7 different institutions. And I have an eclectic background. I started off as an art major. I got a degree in social work with an emphasis in community organizing. Went into totally something different, language and international trade, or the core courses for the MBA, which is much different than social work. And then went back to higher education. Worked at Southern Methodist University, which is a wealthy private institution. Went to UCLA for graduate work. Did a lot of diversity work there. Arizona State for 10 years. Director of a brand new center there called the Intergroup Relations Center, doing strictly campus climate work. University of Denver for about 9 years as the senior diversity officer there. And then I went to South Dakota for 4 years, and I'm glad that I did that, because I ended up working a lot with Native Americans and got to know the spiritual side of the world and the way they see it and how that interacts with higher education and what that actually means, for me. And then I came out back to the Southwest as the Vice Provost for Inclusive Excellence at the University of Arizona. I left that position very recently to start a consulting firm called the LEN Group, the Leadership and Diversity Group. And I am the founder of that, and we are actually getting that going, and we'll begin soon to deliver services.
I'm excited to hear about the LEN Group and a little bit more as we go on, if you'd be willing to share. That sounds like a fantastic opportunity that you've sort of created for yourself. I'm excited to hear more about that. Okay. So you shared a little bit about sort of your journey through higher ed, and a lot of it is sort of founded in diversity. You mentioned being a diversity officer. You mentioned being a director of one of the centers in Arizona State. Tell us a little bit about your time in higher ed, and then your time as a diversity officer or working in diversity specifically. Any challenges stand out to you? Any accomplishments? Just talk about your time a little bit.
I'm going to first talk about my accomplishments. Becoming the inaugural director of the Intergroup Relations Center, which was a brand new idea in American higher ed, doing intergroup relations work for everybody. The Jewish community, the LGBT community, all the ethnic racial communities, veterans, bringing everybody to the table and doing community organizing with them, building relationships, delivering services, getting the excitement going, very much running it like a campaign, so that you get to break up those norms that actually normally prevent us from actually making progress. Because you move fast, you have a campaign, you have energy, you meet with whoever wants to do this work, right? So I got that idea there at Arizona State University. When I became the associate provost for multicultural excellence at the University of Denver, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was specifically brought in because the Higher Learning Commission had criticized the University of Denver for not doing enough around diversity. So they brought me in to get the car started. So we ended up doing that. In the middle of my 9 years there, this concept of inclusive excellence was actually introduced by the American Association of Colleges and Universities. I was about to leave the University of Denver, but because of this new idea, I liked it, and I said we can actually experiment with it at the University of Denver. So we introduced it there, we experimented with it, some successes, some failures, and then I went to the University of South Dakota and did the full-blown model with the president supporting my work as a diversity officer and then making sure that everybody else did their job. So that as opposed to the traditional model is, you hire a diversity officer, they put a diversity office together, they do diversity, everybody else gets a pass. So inclusive excellence, under inclusive excellence, no one gets a pass. Everybody's put to work, depending on what system or office you run. Marketing, athletics, financial aid, advising, curriculum development, the faculty senate, everybody has to make some sort of a contribution. Now, in some cases, the contribution is going to be very, very small, and that's okay. I'll take it, because it's better than what the contribution was last year, which was zero. Yes. But you can imagine getting an entire system, like a machine, working together with diversity and inclusiveness infused into it, and then producing the products called diversity and inclusion, which actually is going to impact the very people that are marginalized. Actually, everybody's going to be impacted in a very positive way, because you end up creating these environments that are very, very inclusive. And I came to the University of Arizona to do the same kind of work. And I was busy that first year of meeting, building relationships. You have to do that. You have to get involved with everybody, and nobody gets left out. In order to explain the vision, in order to do capacity building. So I did a lot of training that year to sort of get the car going, get the campaign going, and then go from there. I left that, again, as I said, to start this consulting firm, and we'll talk about it later as to what it's going to focus on.
Yes, I'm excited to talk more about that.
Okay.
So that sounds like you were absolutely busy, and I think you deserve a lot of credit, it sounds like, from DU and from ASU and really South Dakota, really any other institution you touched, because it sounds like you've been able to not only bring a concept like inclusive excellence to these places, but to really begin embedding it and infusing it through the university, which is never an easy task.
Right. And
because it's not an easy task, Jesus, I'm interested in seeing or hearing about maybe some of the challenges you come across. It doesn't just have to be as a diversity officer or with inclusive excellence, but with the work of diversity. What are some examples of resistance you've come across? What are some challenges you face?
I think that the biggest thing is this idea of privilege as manifested in this idea of not having to think about it. That because of my privilege as a heterosexual, I actually don't have to think about the experiences of the LGBTIQ community and the kinds of things that I will not see, that actually pose barriers for me as an administrator, particularly if I'm in charge of formulating policy, that I'm going to leave that group out because I haven't had to think about it. Right. Whites don't have to think about people of color and all the experiences that they actually have on the campus, so that when you have to think about policies, you leave that community out. Males versus females, disability versus non-disabled, and so forth and so on, right? So that the challenge really has been this idea of privilege, not having to think about it, and then as a result of not having to think about it, making these comments that actually prevent us from moving forward. And if you don't have to think about it, that means that the entire system is not working on it. Some people are working on it. Marginalized communities are working on it. The diversity office is working on it. But if your marketing is not working on it, then that's a big barrier right there towards progress. So I would say that privilege is probably one of the biggest barriers that I have encountered, and trying to get people to understand how that actually plays out.
Yes, I would agree with that. Over in Visceral Change, one thing that we've done is we've crafted an institute to kind of look at what we call the core 5 components of social justice, and we always begin with privilege, because for us, it's important to take something like privilege off the page and make it tangible, because a lot of people correlate this idea of privilege with like a negative connotation.
Right.
That doesn't have to be the case, right? There's other ways to explain that, and I think it's important to begin there. And I appreciate that. I want to go back to a couple of things you mentioned earlier. You started off with a powerful recollection and story of your experience with the death of MLK in April of 1968. And then you went on to highlight this journey towards diversity. If you would, I'd love to hear you fill in the gaps. In other words, what about your upbringing, your identities, that experience sort of shifted your mind and your framework to this work of diversity in the way that you've been able to do it?
I can tell you specifically the day that I decided that discrimination was not going to be acceptable, and it was not going to be perpetuated or practiced against anybody significant in my life. My parents actually, we were farm workers traveling from Texas every summer up to Michigan to go harvest crops. And it was 1968. There were lots of restaurants where we were not wanted, right? As African Americans and other communities were not wanted. Right. Now, there were a lot of gas stations, for example, of white people that also were very accepting. There were a lot of African American establishments that were actually very open to that. But I remember one instance where my mom and dad went into this restaurant. We stayed in the car, and they were going to go get food. And then they came out almost running, and they got in the car, and it's the first time that I've seen my mom and dad scared. These are my heroes, right? They're the leaders of the unit, right? And for the first time, I didn't understand that they were scared, and they said something like, "We're not wanted here." And then later on, we were able to ask my dad what was going on. He said, "They don't want Mexicans there." So I began to realize this idea of discrimination. I began to realize that my dad and my mom, my heroes, actually were scared as a result of that. And I said, "No, never again." So when I got to college and I started to awaken, that's one of the stories that I remembered that actually drove me. Now, I will tell you that I'm not a very good advocate for myself. I fall apart when somebody does something and, I'm asked to actually go and confront them. But if somebody does something against you, I'm going to roll. Which is really an interesting thing. We're very bad advocates for ourselves, but if somebody tries to hurt somebody else. So this is what actually has driven my life. And why actually I have gotten into the work of diversity, as well as many other experiences that have actually formulated my thinking around diversity, and then opportunities to become a diversity officer and go in that particular journey, and so sort of growing and developing in my career.
That's great. That's fantastic, and I appreciate that story. It pops up a couple different questions for me. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to take it, but I think let's segue into a question that you may have answered in this, but I'd love to hear you from your own perspective. I never truly believe that we ever make it anywhere by ourselves. Now, I think we can accomplish things independent from others, and maybe those that have had the most impact in their lives. For example, some folks are able to find and establish themselves without the assistance of their parents or family. Right. But we've latched on to somebody or something. Right. So Jesus, I'd be interested in learning about mentorship. Were there any mentors that guided you along the way? Or if not mentors, any specific thing? Like for me, I had basketball that I stuck to and that kind of kept me on the straight and narrow. Is there something or someone or some people that kind of served as your mentor or your guiding light towards you?
Absolutely. But first of all, let me speak to this idea of, I did it by myself and nobody helped me out. That's nonsense. Yeah. We all have had a ton of people along the way to help us out. All the way from that graduate student who actually, got me to bypass the financial aid line, took me to a counselor that he knew because he had connections, and then by the end of an hour, I had my dorm room and my books and all those kinds of things, as well as the faculty member who said something to me that was very, very, very positive. But concrete people that actually have impacted me in a positive way is Dr. Ray Padilla. He was the first Latino administrator that I had ever met with a PhD, and I had no idea what a PhD was. So he took the time to explain what a PhD is, right? And I appreciate that. And he gave us a lot of words of wisdom in terms of administration, how to deal with politics and things that were happening to us and those kinds of things. And the guy was a genius. I remember he was, one day he invited us over to his house, and he was tinkering with the computer. And he told us, he said, very soon, he said, I'm going to make this computer talk. Right, and we had no idea how he was going to do that, right? Of course, computers talk now all the time, right? But at the time, he said, "I'm going to make it talk," and of course, our eyes were just like wide open. He's like, "Wow!" And he was a Latino administrator in higher ed. He had a doctorate degree in higher education, which I had no idea what the heck that was. And he took the time to write letters of recommendation for us, give us advice, take us over to his house. And he was a prolific writer, so he produced a lot of books, and in bilingual education in particular. And he was a master of politics, so I got a chance to actually learn from him. The other mentor that I want to mention is a person when I was at Arizona State University. He died very recently, almost about a month ago. He passed away. And he had a master's degree. He got a GED, and then he got a master's degree in political science, I think, or something to that effect, right? This guy was a mastermind at politics. He knew how to move agendas. He grew up in the streets. He played politics in the streets, and he brought that to higher education. So he knew exactly what to do. And he taught me a lot, because the frameworks that I had, particularly when I was in trouble, were actually limiting me. And he would actually say, think about this other framework, right? I never thought about that. And then he actually would help me out. And he would always say, I'm going to do my part, but you got to do your part too. Yes. Don't expect me to take all the risks. You got to take some of the risks, right? So as a result of that, I actually learned a lot. And 10 years at Arizona State University, I helped him start the Cesar Chavez Leadership Institute, which is still actually going. And I remember he told me, he said, Jesus, I can't write. I know you can write. I want you to write up the proposal for this program. I know how to fundraise. And we worked together. So I put the curriculum together for the Cesar Chavez Leadership Institute. And he went out to Bank One and all the other banks, US Bank, and he raised the money. And that program is still actually going and it's impacted a lot of students. In fact, one of the students that actually graduated from that program very recently drove one of the immigrants that the Border Patrol has apprehended, drove the mother all the way to New York City to reunite with her daughter. And I have no idea how she did it, but that's one of the graduates from that program. It's like, wow. Yeah, our own students are teaching us stuff to actually get out there and do. Yes. That's amazing. And a lot of the graduates actually, we've seen them marching in Washington. Yep. We've seen them start programs, diversity programs, and other kinds of things. So we laid a seed, and it went from there. So
yeah, that's fantastic, and there's nothing more rewarding than seeing some of those efforts pay off.
I also had a person that actually taught me a very valuable lesson. That was Dr. Roselle Wilson. Okay. This was at Eastern Michigan University. She was the director of Minority Affairs. That's what it was called at the time. And she made sure that as Latinos, that we were taken care of. Because the largest group at the time were African American, and it probably still is, right? So whatever goods and budgets and those kinds of benefits first went to the African American community. And that's understandable. It's the largest community, right? And then we got whatever was left over. Well, Roselle made sure that we got enough. and she told us so, right? And I never forgot that lesson. So when I was at Arizona State University, Latinos are in the majority. It's so the Latino students actually they had no problem finding monies for their programs. It's the African Americans and the other smaller group that had a problem. Who do we go to? What administrators do we have? So actually, as a result of what I learned from Roselle Wilson, I used to hide monies in my budget just for them, and I would tell the Latino student, "There's no more money." But I would reserve it for them because she taught me a very valuable lesson about it's all about us, you know, as opposed to Latinos only, right? That's a problem. We've had that forever, and we need to move towards intersectionality in order to do that. But I learned a very valuable lesson from her about sharing.
That's phenomenal. That's great, and it's clearly served you well as you've impacted a lot of institutions along the way. So let's talk about the Lind Group. What exactly is the Lind Group? What is it that you all do? What's the mission?
Well, you've heard this before, but I'm going to repeat it because it's the best way that I can explain what inclusive excellence is, using the metaphor of the dance. And I think Vernon Myers, I believe, it was the first one to articulate that, and then several of us took the metaphor of the dance and sort of elaborated on it. Sure. Inclusive excellence distinguishes between diversity and inclusion, and you can use the metaphor of a dance to talk about that. So diversity is like being invited to a dance, whereas inclusiveness is actually being asked to dance. And if the dance is actually going to be successful, the ballroom is going to have to be renovated and restructured, very similar to what we're doing with disability, right? They have the law behind them, but there's still a lot of work to be done above and beyond compliance. But nevertheless, they're changing the structure of the ballroom in order for people with disabilities to have a successful dance, right? So of course, I'm referring to universities in this case, right? In addition, the ballroom instructors, the dance instructors, the music that they're playing right now and the dance moves, that's fine. They can continue to do that. But they're going to have to start learning some new dance moves and bringing in some new music that actually will appeal to those communities, those diverse communities, whether it's the LGBT community, the women's community, the ethnic racial community, so that they can feel welcome and invited and asked to actually dance. And in addition to that, we're going to have to start bringing in some new dance instructors, those that already bring those gifts and talents, right? In other words, let's diversify the faculty and the staff and the administration and put those unique qualities and characteristics to work in the name of preparing our students for a diverse democracy and world. And then ultimately, I capped that off by saying that the ballroom managers, the president, the provost, the deans, anybody in a position of power, they're going to have to say that this is important and it will be done. Otherwise, it won't work. But once they do that, then we can start the restructuring of the ballroom. The Lind Group is actually in the business of teaching people how to go about and restructure the ballroom. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, we're stuck in the model, the crisis model. Innovation in American higher education related to diversity has always come out of some sort of a crisis. There's a protest, now we have African American studies. You know, there's somebody got hurt, and then we have Chicano studies, and on and on and on and on. Right? In the meantime, the ballroom never changes. The policies, the procedures, you know, the traditions, they all stay the same, and you actually have like a piecemeal approach. But in the meantime, the actual structure of the university never changes, and the people who actually run it never change either, and they never change their mind in order to be able to say this is going to be important. And to a certain extent, we still have that going on in American higher education. So the Lind Group is actually a consulting firm that will go in and teach people about the dynamics of how to set up a diversity infrastructure in order to begin to question all the policies, the procedures, the processes, the traditions, and behaviors, in order to be able to begin to change those things. And the way that it's going to be done is you embed diversity and inclusion into each one of those aspects. So marketing, for example, that they actually are going to have to start to think about diversity, so that when they actually start a branding campaign, they remember that you need to bring in people of color or other communities and ask them, what would you like the brand to be, right? Because right now they're not being asked to do that. And then as a result of not thinking about it, the images that you see on the web, you know, they're white.
Right.
So that somebody's not thinking about it.
Right.
So if you embed it into the policies and the procedures, then actually you are constantly forced to think about it in order for us to be able to, again, go in this direction and create that larger system, that machine, that is going to be, every single part of the machine is going to be working in order to produce diversity and inclusion and some of the other outcomes that we want related to our students. So that we will work with higher ed, with business, with nonprofit organizations, that a lot of the principles are actually applicable across those three sectors. But of course, it's going to take a little bit different angle working with the different units, and we will actually be able to do that. And then we have some specialized services around intergroup dialogue training, which we've been doing for a long time, as well as other things or services that entities may actually want. We'll be able to offer those.
That's fantastic. That sounds like it's going to be a much needed and a high demand sort of group that I think a lot of people in this area and hopefully nationwide will latch on to. So Jesus, I appreciate you coming to the chopping block. Lastly, how can folks get in touch with you? How can we get in touch and contact you for services?
Well, we have a website. It's called thelengroup.com. And all the information is actually there. And there's actually a few pieces. The metaphor of the dance is on there. I also have a piece on value and diversity as a resource and how to go about doing that. And then all our services are actually there. Our mission statement, the team, as well as the partners that are going to help make this entity come alive and be able to provide services. So that's the quickest way to actually get a hold of us, and we're here to serve.
Fantastic, Jesus. Thank you so much for your time. And,
Thank you.
Hopefully we cross paths again sooner than later.
We will. Thanks.